course, is Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach himself singing V'Hareinu. How are you, my holy sisters and brothers? We've got a fascinating class tonight. We're going to go on a journey from trees to the marital bed. This is going to be super fun and interesting and Talmudic and surprising and unexpected. Let's light up the darkness. Who is going to be with us on this fine Tuesday evening as we get together to do a little learning? Yehudit Sobel from Florence, South Carolina. Paula from Chicago. Chaim is saying good evening. Stephen with us from Dover, New Hampshire. Sharon from Lebanon, New Jersey. Lucy from Minneapolis. Robin from Connecticut. Melissa from Great Neck. Rose from New Mexico. James from Indianapolis. Bill from Arkansas. Isabel Estrella de la Ciudad de F de Mexico. Bienvenida. Jillian Hoban says Erev Tov from Southern Illinois near Mount Vernon. Ann is with us from Merced, California. Rev Marlish from Lincoln, Nebraska. Angie from Ohio. Diane from Plano, Texas. Nancy from North Carolina. Roger from Brooklyn, Michigan. I didn't know there was a Brooklyn in Michigan. How cool. Or perhaps you're from Brooklyn and Michigan. Let us know. Randy says shalom from Florida and Hodesh Tov. Yosef with us from Lowell, Mass. Gail from Virginia. Lynn from Richmond, Virginia. Yosef has the same question to me. Is there a Brooklyn in Michigan? And Marion with us from Medford, Long Island. Also, Shira Diaz with us from Texas on the YouTube side. Welcome, everybody. All right, we're going on a very Talmudic journey here. Where are we? Another milestone. This is Daf Kuf. That is page 100 in Tractate Eruvin, the third volume of the Talmud. We're in chapter 10. That's the last chapter in this tractate. Sunday night, with God's help, we'll be celebrating our siyum, our completion of Tractate Eruvin, which has 105 pages. Actually 104, because every tractate of the Talmud starts on page 2. But whatever, it goes to page 105, and we're going to reach that with God's help on Sunday. So definitely, you want to be with us on Sunday. Have a l'chaim ready, a little something to drink, a little something to eat so that we can make a blessing together. It's traditional to have not bread, but something that's a grain product, maybe a pastry, something like that. At our regular time, 6 p.m. on Sunday, we'll complete the last page. We'll say a series of blessings, and then we'll just read the first few lines of the next tractate, Pesachim, because whenever we finish studying a volume of Jewish wisdom, we always want to start another one right away so that we're always learning, always studying. Okay, so this chapter 10 really is going to complete our journey through the laws of Shabbos. We're going to learn other things through our massive journey, 7.5-year journey through the Talmud, but the formal study of the laws of Shabbos was Tractate Shabbos and Tractate Eruvin together. We're going to complete that on Sunday. This chapter 10 has a whole bunch of sort of, a hodgepodge of extra laws thrown in at the end, and that's a good recipe for interesting things happening. So tonight we're studying Mishna number 8, and as we're going to see, we're going to start with the law of trees, and we're going to make our way in a very Talmudic, logical, semi-logical manner all the way to the marital bed, and we're going to learn a few things, a few bits of wisdom, really colorful along the way. So let's get into it. All right, our Mishnah is quite short. The Mishnah says, Mishnah number 8 here in chapter 10, with regard to a tree that was hanging over the ground, i.e. its branches hung down on all sides like a tent, so that it threw a shadow on the ground. So imagine a willow tree, a nice big tree, and all its leaves hang down and almost all the way to the ground, or even to the ground. So its branches hung down on all sides like a tent. If the tips of its branches are no higher than 3 handbreadths from the ground, so the branches reach all the way down to the ground, or at least within 3 handbreadths of the ground, then on Shabbos, one may carry under that tree, because the branches all around form a partition, and this becomes an enclosure and a private like a private domain, and so you can carry within the partitions that these branches all surround you. Why? Because they come down within 3 handbreadths of the ground, and as we've seen, the principle of lavut, connection, that if it's within 3 handbreadths, it's as if they touch the ground, so it's like you're surrounded by an enclosure. If it's, and this applies even if the tree is planted in a public domain, as the branches form partitions which turn the enclosed area into a private domain. If its roots were 3 handbreadths higher than the ground, one may not sit on them, as it is prohibited to use a tree on Shabbos. Any part of a tree that is 3 handbreadths above the ground has the status of a tree with regard to this prohibition. So as we'll see, we cannot make use of a tree on Shabbos. You can't lean on a tree, you can't climb into a tree, you can't rest your stuff on a tree. You can't make use of a tree, not the side of a tree, not the branches. You definitely can't climb it and sit in the tree. But if the roots are within 3 handbreadths of the ground, so they don't have the status of the tree, they have the status of the ground, right? So even though there's thick roots that come out of the ground, as long as they don't rise more than 3 handbreadths above the ground, then it's as if they're part of the ground and you could sit on those roots. I mean, 3 handbreadths, right? It's not so small, about like that. So that's a pretty thick root. It's, and you might well want to sit on that, and that's permitted. But higher than that has the status of the tree, and you can't make use of it on Shabbos. Now that we have these 2 permissions, one to carry in this enclosure formed by a tree whose branches come down and touch and come within 3 handbreadths of the ground, and the other to sit on roots as long as they don't rise higher than 3 handbreadths above the ground, what's the Gemara going to do? We're going to put some limitations on these permissions that are in the Mishnah. So, Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, says, this enclosure that's made by the branches. Now, if you can imagine a huge willow tree that all those branches hang down and come down within 3 handbreadths of the ground, but the space inside is quite large. So imagine if it's 2 base se'ah, which as we've seen before is like 5,000 square cubits. So you would imagine an area that's like bigger than the tabernacle was, which was 50 cubits by 100 cubits, right? 5,000 square cubits is quite large, right? So it's about 70-something cubits by 70-something cubits, So about 100 feet by 100 feet, that would be a large enclosure. Larger than that, so then we're not going to be able to carry within the space under those branches, even though it has partitions that come within 3 handbreadths of the ground, because it's not an enclosure made for a residence. Even if it was larger than 2 base, but it was made for a residential purposes, then we would be able to carry there. But since this was clearly not created for residential purposes, we're not going to be permitted to carry in such a large enclosure. With regard to the roots, what if the roots rise above 3 handbreadths from the ground? So now they have the status of the tree, not of the ground, so you're not permitted to sit on them. But it's like they rise up above 3 handbreadths above the ground, but then they descend again, right? So you could definitely imagine that. Huge, some kind of a tree, those like baobab trees, right? That have these huge roots above the ground. And then after a while, they descend back, and go back down into the ground. So they came at some point higher than 3 handbreadths above the ground, but then now they're at a point where they're lower than 3 handbreadths from the ground. Can you use that part and sit on it? That's the question that's been asked. So Rabbah says, listen, if you're talking about a place in the roots, that is, it rises above the ground, but is less than 3 handbreadths above the ground, so it has the status of the ground, and you could sit there. But Rav Sheshes says these roots are getting to that place where they're low enough to sit on, but they're coming from a place where they're higher and it's prohibited. So they come from a prohibited source, and therefore you cannot sit on them, even though in that spot they're lower than 3 handbreadths from the ground. That's their dispute, right? So we're going to leave it at that for a moment. So Abaye says, Abaye had a house. Okay, so Abaye lived in Babylonia, in the Jewish community in Babylonia. And he had a house that had a tree in an inner courtyard, but it's not really an inner courtyard. This is a really interesting house. I've seen houses like this. So he has an indoor tree. Like there was a tree and they built a house around it, right? Something like that. I think that the illustration in the Koran is actually a little bit better than the one that I have over here, right? So if you look over there, right? So there was a big palm tree like that, and they built a house around it, right? It's kind of like a skylight, and the tree extends up through the skylight. So inside the house, right, there's the trunk of a palm tree growing through the house, and up on the roof, it extends upward. So the question is, if you're standing on the roof, can you use the first 3 handbreadths of that tree because it would have the status of the roof itself, which is like the ground, because as we've seen, the roof of a house is considered its own private domain. So, and we've also seen that when we talk about a house, for certain halachic purposes, legalistic purposes, the house is considered as if it's full of dirt, you could say. So when you're in the house, well, you're not standing, it's not full of dirt, right? You're in a house, and that tree trunk is right there. On Shabbos, you can't make use of that tree trunk. It's an odd thing to have a tree trunk growing right through your house, but on Shabbos, you can't use that. The question is, what about on the roof? On the roof, is the first 3 handbreadths of the tree, is it going to have the same status as the ground, like those roots that are just above the ground, and therefore you could use that part of the tree? Or since the ground is actually far below, maybe you can't use any part of the tree. So Abaye had his house, and he didn't know the answer. So he went to his teacher, Yosef. What did Rav Yosef say to Abaye? He said, you can use the bottom 3 handbreadths of the part of the tree that sticks up through the roof. In other words, when you're standing on the roof, right, the bottom, where the tree emerges on the rooftop, the first 3 handbreadths have the status of the roof itself as if you're on the ground, and you can use the first 3 handbreadths of the tree. Rav Acha bar Talifa said to Abaye, the one who permitted you to use the bottom 3 handbreadths of the tree that sticks out from the roof, his ruling was in accord with Rabbah, right? We saw before, Rabbah said, even if there was a tree root that came up more than 3 handbreadths above the ground, but then it descended within 3 handbreadths of the ground, you may use the part that is within 3 handbreadths of the ground, even though some other part of the root was higher than that. And so Rav Acha bar Talifa says, right, so Rav Yosef gave you a ruling. He said to Abaye, Rav Yosef, your teacher, gave you a ruling which accords with Rabbah. The Gemara comments, pshita, meaning obvious. This is obvious that this accords with Rabbah. Why does Rav Acha bar Talifa have to mention that this accords with Rabbah? What's he saying? Answers the Gemara, well, you might have thought that Rav Yosef, his ruling about the bottom 3 handbreadths of the tree that emerges from the roof, would even accord with the ruling of Rav Sheshes, who said that if it comes up higher than 4 handbreadths and then comes down again, it's coming from a prohibited source, so you can't sit on it. But if the house is considered as if it's full of dirt, then this is the ground up here, and the bottom 3 handbreadths of the tree, it's not coming from a prohibited source, because often we consider a house as if it's full. For certain halakhic purposes, we consider a house as if it's full. So you might have thought that Rav Yosef's ruling even accords with Rav Sheshes. Rav Acha bar Talifa said Rav Yosef accords with Rabbah to tell us that Rav Sheshes would not agree with this ruling of Rav Yosef. Rav Sheshes would say, listen, when you're in that house, you know it's not full of dirt. There's a tree trunk right there. You can't make use of that tree trunk on Shabbos. And the part that sticks up through the roof is coming from a prohibited source. It's an extension of a part of the trunk that is prohibited. We're not going to say that at the bottom where the tree comes out of the ground, we can use the first 3 handbreadths, and then we could use them again, the 3 handbreadths that are within the 3 handbreadths of the roof surface itself. So Rav Sheshes would not agree, but Rav Yosef accords with this, and according to Rav Acha bar Talifa, Rabbah would agree. And just to clarify, the halacha of trees, it is prohibited to climb a tree on Shabbos, to lean against it, to hang from one of its branches, or to utilize it in any other manner. Why is it prohibited to utilize a tree in any way? Several explanations are given, but perhaps the simplest is this is a decree of the rabbis. It's a rabbinic decree that we may not utilize a tree in any way. Why? They are protecting us from coming to violate a biblical prohibition. What is the biblical prohibition? These are the 39 prohibited labors on Shabbos. One of them is harvesting in any way. What does that mean? If you cut anything from a living plant on Shabbos, you have performed the prohibited labor of harvesting, right? You can't harvest on Shabbos, you can't work your farm, you can't chop wheat, you can't chop down corn, but also you can't go out in your garden and cut a sprig of rosemary to put in your tea. You can't do that on Shabbos. And if you were to lean against a tree or climb a tree, etc., use a tree in some way, you might come to separate some living part of the tree from the tree, and then you would have violated a Torah prohibition. So we cannot use, according to the rabbis, a tree in any way on Shabbos. But as we saw, those bottom 3 handbreadths don't have the status of the tree. They have the status of the ground because they're within 3 handbreadths of the ground. Okay. And so, and now the Gemara says, and one may not climb a tree on Friday while it is still day. It's permitted to climb trees during the week. There's no problem with that. But you may not climb a tree before Shabbos begins during daytime on Friday, and then be in it when Shabbos starts and planning to sit in the tree on Shabbos. Why? Because when you're sitting in the tree, you climbed it while it was day, but now that it's Shabbos, you're making use of a tree, and you're not allowed to make use of a tree on Shabbos. So you can't climb up there while it's still day, planning to sit there while it is Shabbos. This use of the tree is prohibited. It's also prohibited, by the way, to make use of animals. You can't sit on an animal on Shabbos. And the issue is not the effort of climbing, right? Because you can climb up on a fence and sit there. You can climb down into a ditch and sit there. That's okay on Shabbos, but you can't make use of a tree. Okay, so then the Gemara asks, well, what if you did climb the tree and now you're in it? All right, so you shouldn't have done it, but you did. Now you're in the tree. What are you going to do? I'm reminded, Nina and I are a screenwriting team, and very often screenwriting is described as, get your protagonist up in a tree and then throw rocks at him, right? Like stuff has to keep happening to your protagonist so that the audience can see, how the protagonist's character is revealed as he deals with the many troubles that come his way during a movie, right? So you put him in the tree, now what happens? All right, so you're in the tree on Shabbos. Can you come back down? What should you do? So we actually have 2 baraisas that are contradictory. Baraisas were issued contemporaneously with the Mishnah, right? They're teachings from the oral tradition that are not quite as authoritative as the Mishnah, but were contemporaneous with it. And there are two baraisas, two teachings of the sages. One says, if you climb the tree on Shabbos, you may not climb down, like you're stuck in the tree. And another baraisa says, if you climb the tree on Shabbos, you may climb down. So which is it? We have two totally contradictory rulings. The Gemara answers, la kashya. No difficulty. This is a great phrase. It comes up all the time. La kashya, right? We already seen two colorful, important phrases in Talmudic reasoning. Pshita, obvious, right? This is easy. Or la kashya, no difficulty, right? We can reconcile this contradiction. So la kashya. If he went up on Friday, while it was still day, before Shabbos began, so we let him climb down, right? After Shabbos begins, we don't want him stuck up in that tree. Now he can come down. But if he climbed up the tree while it was Shabbos, and he really violated a prohibition to use the tree by climbing it while it was Shabbos, then we penalize him and tell him you can't climb down. That's one approach to reconciling these two contradictory baraisas. Or another approach. Both baraisas refer to climbing into the tree on Shabbos, but if you did it unwittingly, like you didn't know it, you climbed up on Shabbos, but you didn't know it was Shabbos, and then somebody told you, it's Shabbos, you can't be up in that tree, like, oh no, I shouldn't be up here. Well, you didn't do it wittingly, so we let the person come down. But if it was intentional, he knew it was Shabbos and he climbed up there anyway, then we penalize him and we say he can't come down. Now, obviously, it's not that we're standing there with a whip and saying, don't you dare come down. These restrictions, prohibitions, decrees are going to apply to a pious person that wants to conduct himself appropriately according to the law. Why would a pious person intentionally violate Shabbos? So, people make mistakes all the time. Maybe he knew it was Shabbos, but he just succumbed to temptation because, a rock star was coming down the street and he just kind of forgot himself for a moment and climbed the tree or just did it anyway, And then he's like, okay, I saw the celebrity. Now I'm in the tree. What am I going to do? I do want to follow the law. What is the law for me? And then he asks some knowledgeable person nearby. Okay, so he climbed up intentionally. So according to this approach to reconciling these contradictory baraisas, you're penalized. You went up there intentionally on Shabbos, stay there until the end of Shabbos, and then come down. Or a different approach. Actually, the two baraisas both refer to somebody who climbed up the tree on Shabbos unwittingly. He didn't do it on purpose. And one sage is saying that we penalize the unwitting sinner because of the intentional sinner. And the other sage is saying we don't penalize the unwitting sinner on account of the intentional sinner. In other words, are we going to make a policy that is going to distinguish between between motivation, or is it going to be a little bit more of a strict liability? Like, well, if you climb that tree on Shabbos, you're penalized and you can't come down, and we're not going to distinguish between one who did it wittingly and one who did it intentionally? Or are we going to make that distinction? And perhaps those are the differences between these two teachings, these two baraisas. Okay. In order to sort of help understand how we might further analyze this question, the Gemara goes off on a big digression, which we're not going to cover. We're just going to summarize it, and it's going to be from the law of sacrifices that were brought in the temple. And when you brought an animal sacrifice, depending on what kind of a sacrifice it was, and one kind of animal sacrifice that was brought was by shepherds, right, who have lots of farm animals, and you sacrifice the firstborn of the mother, right? You bring the bechor, you bring a firstborn, and you sacrifice it in the temple. And another kind of sacrifice is, for example, a sin offering, right? The bechor, when you bring that sacrifice to the temple, part of the procedure for bringing it up on the altar is that some of its blood, the blood is always removed from the animal, and some of that blood is poured on the altar. It's just part of that procedure. And for a different kind of offering, a sin offering, a thanksgiving offering, a peace offering, I forget which offering was referred to here. I think it was a sin offering. When you separate the blood from the animal, then you pour some of that blood onto each of the four corners of the altar. The question that's asked is, if you had two different sacrifices and somehow their bloods became mingled, what do? There's one kind of blood needs to be poured on the four corners. The other kind of blood can only be poured in one place. Now they're mingled. If you take the mingled blood and pour it on the four corners, well, then with respect to the blood that should have only been poured once, you've added to the mitzvah. And we've been told that you don't add to the essential elements of a mitzvah. You don't do extra elements of a mitzvah. You fulfill a commandment the way the Torah said you're intended to fulfill it. On the other hand, if you just pour it in one place, then the part of the mingled blood that belonged to the sin offering that was supposed to be poured in four places, now it only got poured in one place, and so you didn't complete the mitzvah. You subtracted from the proper way to fulfill the mitzvah. So once you're in that situation, how are we going to handle it, right? How are we going to handle it? And it's similar, and the reason that analysis is brought is because now we've got this guy who's in the tree. He climbed into the tree on Shabbos, and the question is he permitted to come down? So, Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, says that according to Rabbi Eliezer's view of the question of the mixed bloods, it would be better to do a single positive transgression and climb down, right? So when you climb down from the tree, you're climbing down, you're making use of the tree, you might even knock some piece of the tree off. It's not good, but at least it's over quickly, and then you're not passively doing a passive transgression that continues all day of sitting in the tree, right? You're not supposed to be sitting in the tree at all. So it'd be better to do the positive action of climbing down than to passively do this prohibited action of sitting in the tree all day long. Says the Gemara, according to Rabbi Yehoshua's view from that other case of the mixed bloods of the offerings, it's better to sit up in the tree because you're doing nothing. Yes, it's prohibited to be up there, but at least you're not doing an action which we know is wrong. And climbing down, that action, climbing down is just as bad as climbing up. It's prohibited to take that positive action to climb the tree, to make use of the tree to get yourself down. Then the Gemara says, yeah, but this analogy doesn't really work so well because Rabbi Eliezer himself might not actually agree. Since in the other case, there was a mitzvah involved, the commandment of bringing offerings on the altar in the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. Here, there's no mitzvah, right? He wants to get out of the tree, so he's not continuing a transgression, but he's not fulfilling any obligation. He's not bringing an offering. He's not doing any good thing. He just wants to stop committing a transgression. So Rabbi Eliezer might agree, he might not agree that since there's no mitzvah involved, he might not agree that this guy should take a quick positive action and just get out of the tree. And on the other hand, Rabbi Yehoshua there was not dealing with a case where inaction results in an ongoing transgression, right? You're bringing an offering, but if you don't pour that mixed blood, then, there's not a transgression. You're just not quite sure how to deal with that situation. Here, the guy sitting in that tree all of Shabbos is an ongoing transgression, so perhaps even Rabbi Yehoshua would agree he should just do the quick positive transgression and get out of the tree. So come down. Let's see. Rami Bar Abba says in the name of Rav Asi, it is prohibited to walk on grass on Shabbos because he may uproot grass, right? So this idea that the rabbis are going to issue a decree to protect you from coming to violate a Torah prohibition. So says Rami Bar Abba in the name of Rav Asi, you shouldn't walk on grass. Because if you walk on grass, you might come to pull up some of the grass, and then you would have harvested. That's a Torah prohibition. And so lest you cut grass, living grass from the ground, yank it out with your feet by mistake, better you shouldn't walk on grass at all. What's his proof text for that? He cites a line from Proverbs 19:2, and he who hastens with his feet sins, right? A person who moves too fast with his feet sins. What is the sin? It might be that you're walking on grass and you're going to pull out some grass. You're walking on grass on Shabbos and you're going to come to pull out some grass from the ground. And again, we have two baraisas that are contradictory. One baraisa says you may walk on the grass on Shabbos, and the other baraisa says you may not walk on the grass on Shabbos. So there's going to be 5 approaches, and we're going to go through them quickly, to reconcile this apparent contradiction between the sages, one who says you may walk on grass on Shabbos, and the other one who said you may not walk on grass on Shabbos. So the first approach to reconcile it is, well, one sage was talking about you can walk on dead grass, right? Like dried out grass that is no longer alive. All right, it's already, even if you pulled it out of the ground, it wouldn't matter because it's dead already. You're not cutting off a living thing. And the one who said you may not walk on grass, he was talking about green grass, right? Growing grass, living grass. And so that's an easy way to reconcile that contradiction. Or perhaps they were both talking about green living grass, but one of them was talking about you may not do this in the summer because there are seeds on the grass, and when you walk through the grass, some of those seeds will become dislodged, and it's as if you perform the prohibited action of harvesting the seeds, like pulling the seeds off of the plant. And the other sage was saying, he was talking about in the rainy season when there's no seeds on the grass and we don't have to worry that you will dislodge seeds from the grass. Or they were both talking about the summer season, but one was saying you're wearing shoes, in which case it's permitted, and the other was saying if you're walking through the grass in the summer season and you're barefoot, your toes are like, some of the grass is going to get caught between your toes and you're going to pull some of the grass out with your feet. So he would prohibit the barefoot person from walking on the grass. Or they're both talking about a person who's wearing shoes in the summer, but the one who prohibits is talking about a person who has spikes on their shoes, and the other person is talking about a person who does not have spikes on their shoes. They had spikes on their shoes? Yeah, you can imagine. There was a lot of mud that these people were walking through. And, they didn't have like fancy Timberland rubber soles, but they would take leather soles and put some spikes into it to get some traction. And if you had spikes like that, like golf shoes, you would definitely pull some grass out as you were walking through the grass. So the one who prohibits is talking about somebody who's wearing shoes with spikes, and the one who permits is somebody who's just wearing shoes. Or they're both talking about a person who's wearing shoes with spikes and walking in the summer, but one of them is talking about long grass, and you can't walk through long grass because some of that grass will definitely get tangled up in your shoes and your spikes and will be pulled out of the ground. And the other one is talking about short grass, which really isn't going to be affected by the person walking over it. Funnily, at the end of this discussion, the Gemara says, well, all of these methods for reconciling the apparent contradiction between the two baraisas is all well and good. There's a lot of wisdom there. But in the end, the law follows Rabbi Shimon with respect to Shabbos. And Rabbi Shimon said that as long as it is not necessarily foreseeable, in other words, like you are not responsible for the unintended consequences of a permitted action as long as it was not inevitable, okay? So is it inevitable that you will pull some grass out when you walk over it? No, you might not pull grass out. Since it's not inevitable and it was not your intention to pull grass out of the ground, so per the leniency of Rabbi Shimon, we could just walk over grass and not worry about it. So in case you were wondering, can you walk on the grass on Shabbos? Yes, you can walk on the grass on Shabbos per the leniency of Rabbi Shimon. Rami Bar Chama, in the name of Rav Asi, cites this same verse from Proverbs 19:2, that, and he who hastens with his feet sins. And he says, no, but actually this verse comes to teach something different. He says that the word feet, regalim, in this verse is a euphemism for conjugal relations. Right? It's a euphemism for conjugal relations. The one who hastens conjugal relations, marital relations, sins. What does that mean? Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi says, one who forces his wife to perform the mitzvah, the marital mitzvah, will have unworthy children. The husband may want it, but if the wife doesn't, he may not demand it of her. And God forbid he does that. He demands it when she is not in the mood for it. The natural consequence of this, according to Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, is that they will have unworthy children, whatever that means. So what should a husband do when she's not in the mood and he's in the mood? He should, whisper sweet nothings and be very pleasing to her, and and make an effort, make a gallant effort to win her over so she'll be in the mood. And how do we know that? There was an episode that we learned, I think it was in Tractate Brachas, it might have been Tractate Shabbos, now I'm not sure, but we already encountered it for sure, where Rav Kahana hid under his teacher's bed. His teacher was Rav, and he heard Rav whispering sweet nothings to his wife. And then he made a noise, and Rav said, "Is someone here?" And Rav Kahana said, "Yes, it's me. I just wanted to learn the Torah of how a husband should be with his wife." And Rav said, "This is super inappropriate. Get the hell out of here. You shouldn't be here." And Rav Kahana said, "Well, I'm sorry, but this too is Torah, and I must learn it." Now, that was not proper behavior in any way, as Rav Kahana learned from his teacher, Rav. Nevertheless, the lesson was recorded in the Talmud that a husband should speak very sweetly to his wife, particularly, when they're preparing to and during the act of marital relations. Well, elsewhere we learn you shouldn't be talking during the act, but as you're preparing for the act, it should be in a good mood. It's sweet words passing between the couple. We have a baraisa which says, it is also prohibited to perform the mitzvah with his wife, let's say she consented, and then hasten to repeat it in a way that causes her pain or distress, right? So she was up for it, and then he wanted to do it again, and she wasn't up for it, so no good. You will never, there is never an excuse to force your wife to do anything or to cause her pain or distress. Then the Gemara comments, but didn't Rava say that this is the way to have male children? To mate with your wife and then repeat, right? To do it twice in a row, that that kind of conduct is more likely to result in the couple having male children. La kashya, no difficulty. That might be the way to have male children, but only with her consent. She has to be all on board that plan. It can't be the husband's plan and not her plan. Then it's no good. Rav Shmuel bar Nachmani, and we're coming to the end, so if you have questions or comments, please put them in the comments now, and I'll be addressing your questions and comments momentarily. Rav Shmuel bar Nachmani said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, any woman that demands her husband fulfill his conjugal mitzvah. So we just said the husband may not demand of the wife, right? It's up to her whether she's in the mood or not. He may not demand from her. But Rav Shmuel bar Nachmani says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, any woman who demands from her husband that he fulfill his conjugal mitzvah, is this permitted? Not only is it permitted, but such a woman will have sons the likes of which did not exist even in the generation of Moses. Wow, what a statement that is. Where does Rav Shmuel bar Nachmani get, or rather, where does Rabbi Yochanan get this teaching? He cites 2 verses in the book of Deuteronomy. With regard to Moses' generation, it is written, "Get you wise men and understanding and well-known from each of your tribes, and I will make them chief over you." That's Deuteronomy 1:13. And it is later written, "So I took the heads of your tribes, wise men and well-known, and made them chiefs over you. However, men possessing understanding, bina, which is a more lofty quality than wisdom, Moses could not find any of these." Here, the Gemara is distinguishing between Chachma and Bina, between wisdom and understanding. Here, the approach is that wisdom is sort of like the flash of inspiration that you figure something out. But Bina is your ability to process that flash of inspiration where you figured out the answer, but now you understand how to apply that bit of wisdom in different situations. That's why it's a higher quality than wisdom. So Moses was looking for men of wisdom and understanding to be chiefs over parts of the tribes, and he was able to find men of wisdom, but not men of understanding. So why is a woman, a wife who demands conjugal relations from her husband, she's going to have sons which have this quality of understanding? Where do we get that? So there, the Gemara refers to 2 verses, one from Genesis 30:16 and the other from 1 Chronicles 12:33. With regard to Leah, right? So Leah and Rachel were the wives of Jacob. And you'll recall that Jacob really loved Rachel, but ended up married to both Rachel and Leah. And Leah was sort of like the spurned wife. He didn't really want to be married to Leah. He wanted to be married to Rachel. He ended up married to both of them through, it's a whole long story. But it made Leah unhappy. Ultimately, she did ultimately have a good marriage, but for a while it was really difficult for her. And it's like Jacob wanted to be with Rachel, not with Leah. And she had to, force the issue and demand that he be with her. And so about Leah, it is written, "And Leah went out to meet him and said, 'You must come in to me, for indeed I have hired you with my son's mandrakes.'" Right? Because Rachel, who was childless at that time, thought perhaps because Leah, she was the spurned wife, but she was very fertile and had a lot of kids. Her oldest was Reuben. At one point, he picked this plant, this mandrakes, and Rachel said, "Well, maybe these mandrakes will help me conceive children." And so she said, "Can you have your son give me some of those mandrakes?" And Leah said, "Sure, he'll give you the mandrakes, but I get Jacob tonight." That's the deal the sisters made. Now Leah goes in to see Jacob, reporting that she made this deal and demands that he be with her. The offspring of that particular conjugal meeting of Leah and Jacob was Issachar, her son Issachar. And what does it say about Issachar? About Issachar it is written, "And the children of Issachar, men who had understanding at all times, to know what Israel ought to do. The heads of them were 200, and all their brethren were at their commandment." Right? So the sons of Issachar were men of great understanding. And in fact, by the way, I'll just mention I wasn't planning this, but we are having our fundraising. This is our big fundraising period toward the end of the year. And it's often understood that just like the relationship between these 2 brothers, Zebulon and Issachar, they had a relationship where Issachar were the Torah scholars and Zebulon were the merchants. But they had a deal to work together. So Zebulon supported Issachar, right? They gave them, it's part of their income so that the tribe of Issachar could spend their time studying Torah and sharing Torah with the rest of Israel. And Zebulon shared in the merit of all that Torah studying and teaching by supporting it. So if you'd like to have a Zebulon-Issachar relationship with accidental Talmudists, this is a good time to donate and support our nonprofit at donate.accidentaltalmudist.org. When you support us, you share in the merit of all the Torah study we do and all the Torah teaching we do with the whole world. It's a very big merit for you in this world and in the next world. So from this teaching, we see that Leah demanded of her husband Jacob that he, have conjugal relations with her. And was the result worthy children? The worthiest. Fantastic. So men may not demand from their wives. They have to be, princely and gallant and seductive and, warm her up toward him. But women, if they want, they can demand from their husbands. That's what we just learned according here to Rav Shmuel bar Nachmani in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Okay, we did that. And now we're almost at the very end. And then the Gemara says, but wait a minute. Didn't Rav Yitzhak bar Avdimi say it is praiseworthy for a woman to form that desire for her husband in her heart, but not to say it out loud? Right? Didn't Rav Yitzhak bar Avdimi say, no, it's good that she desires her husband, but she shouldn't speak those demands out loud, perhaps like Leah did? So, right, this is not the law. This is, we're going to talk about what the law is in 1 second. And so the Gemara answers, okay, we understand the issue. The woman should demand from her husband, but she should do it with body language. How does she do that? She should make it clear what she wants by making herself pleasing to her husband, but not say it out loud. And the halacha is, although it is inappropriate for a woman to demand her conjugal rights verbally, she is certainly permitted to make herself pleasing to her husband and allude to her desire. Once a woman has expressed her desire, it is a mitzvah, a commandment for her husband to initiate relations with her, even beyond his general conjugal obligation. So it is appropriate for the wife to demand and make it clear that she wants, but she shouldn't say it out loud in words so much. She should just make it clear that that's what she wants, and then it becomes a Torah obligation for the husband to deliver, to stand and deliver, as it were. All right, that's what I've got for us today. Let us check comments and questions. Jason Lipstein, what is the difference between the floor of the roof as opposed to the floor inside the house with respect to the tree that sticks up through the hole in the roof? The difference is that the roof of a house is considered a separate domain from the house. And we understand that when we think about, often the way that the city dwelling in Talmudic times, it was like there was a lot of townhouses next to each other, and often the rooftops were connected. And it's like the rooftops was another domain. But suffice it to say that the roof counts as its own private domain, separate from the house. Therefore, you could think, according to Rav Yosef, and we believe that Rabbah would agree, that the part of the tree that sticks up through the roof, even though it passes through the house, those first 3 handbreadths that protrude from the roof, it would be permissible to use them in some way, to lean against that part of the tree, because it's within 3 handbreadths of the surface of the roof. Yosef Shum, is one only liable to bring a sin offering only for unwitting sin, but what about intentional? Right, so we covered that a little bit earlier. We've been talking about that, and we'll talk about it again. But especially at the beginning of Tractate Shabbos, we were talking. So if you violate if you violate a Torah prohibition intentionally, you can't bring a sin offering for that, right? The sin offering is because you did it unwittingly. It wasn't on purpose, right? And there's different ways to define what witting and unwitting means. But for an intentional sin, you atone for it. You absolutely want to atone for it. But the sin offering is not designed for that kind of transgression. It's designed for the unwitting transgression. These days, we can't bring offerings anyway. The Holy Temple is not standing. And yet, we certainly can atone for our sins. How do we atone for our sins? First of all, we face them bravely. We acknowledge exactly what we did. And we study, why did I come to be in a situation where I committed that sin? What was I thinking? What was I doing? What was I doing before? You really come to understand what it is in you that led you to commit a sin, because now you want to make a teshuvah, right? You want to make an atonement, but it's not just an atonement. You're sorry and you want to apologize to God in your prayers, with all your heart and sincerity. But then you also, coupled with that, have to organize yourself and your life so that you don't do it again, right? You have to really mean it that you're not going to do it again and that you're going to do the work of not doing it again. That's how we atone. And that applies to intentional sins as well. Sharon Frant Brooks, what about the principle of taking an action to make Shabbos a delight? Surely you can't derive pleasure from Shabbos up in a tree, nor can you have the required meals, etc., for Shabbos. I mean, that discussion, I don't know that we came out with a clear halacha of whether you descend again or not. Well, here it is. Let's read what it says. So here's the halacha where it comes out. One who is situated on a tree on Shabbos, right? You're in the tree. In the case of one who climbed up a tree on Shabbos, if he did so intentionally, it is prohibited for him to climb down until nightfall. However, if he acted unwittingly, he is permitted to descend. If he went up on Friday, he may descend after nightfall in either case. The most lenient ruling is accepted here, as no conclusion was reached in the Gemara's discussion. In addition, the halacha is lenient with regard to an uncertainty that involves a rabbinic prohibition. Some authorities state that if one ascended Friday intentionally with the intention of staying there in a prohibited manner on Shabbos, he is prohibited from coming down. The Rima claims these halachas apply only to a person. It is certainly prohibited to remove on Shabbos in any manner an object that has been placed on a tree before Shabbos. So your point is very good, Sharon. You'd think that, if you're stuck in that tree, you're not going to be fulfilling the mitzvah of delighting in Shabbos. But this is a rabbinic penalty for something you shouldn't have done. You shouldn't have ascended the tree. But as we see, because it's by rabbinic decree, if there's any room for doubt whether you ascended the tree wittingly or unwittingly, maybe it was a moment of forgetfulness and you could legitimately claim it was unwitting, then it seems like you could come down. But if you just went up there intentionally during Shabbos, okay, so then you have to wait until after Shabbos to come down, according to this halacha. Yosef says, was unwanted marital relation considered as rape in the sage's day? So you're talking about within a marriage, right? So if the husband forced the wife, is it rape where he's going to be punished like a rapist? That's unclear. I mean, it's said here the fact that it says here that the consequence is going to be that they're going to have unworthy children doesn't mean that we have a ruling on the question of can a husband be guilty of rape if he forces himself on his wife. We don't have a ruling on that question. We haven't encountered that ruling yet. So I don't know is the answer. And Robert Youngblood says that Rabbi Barclay speaks highly of you, my brother. Oh, I love Rabbi Barclay. Please give him my warmest regards. Okay, my friends, that's what I've got for us today. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow night, 6 p.m. Pacific, the regular time. By the way, if you like this shirt, the Grateful Yid shirt, this and many other awesome gifts, including our Hanukkah shirts, and we've lately added sweatshirts. We've got a Baruch Hashem shirt and a God Bless shirt, all in our merchandise store at shop.accidentaltalmudist.org. They make great gifts and they're really fun, and I gotta say they're exceptionally comfortable. Our partner for making them is Teespring, and all profits go to our nonprofit to help support our nonprofit. So check those out at shop@accidentaltalmudist.org. Have a great night.